Episode 40, Neo-Empire. Ludwig sat in his comfortable leather command seat. The bridge of his brand new airship Mark III, the sapphire light, was bathed in the blue glow of the floating holographic screens. The bridge had a smooth design with a massive window that took up the entire front and stretched across some of the walls and roof, made of glass reinforced by spells. The bridge sat at the top of a tower raised above the rest of the ship, giving Ludwig a view over the sleek battleship, built of shiny blue metal and dotted with turrets. These weren't the primitive bill blasters that the Koopa troop had been using since the first Koopa War. These were new weapons, a combination of his own genius and the advanced technology of the alien troops. The Sapphire Light had never seen battle before, nor had any of the other new warships, but that was soon about to change. Ludwig lounged with his head propped up against his fist. His crew members sat on their seats, working the futuristic controls and looking at reports coming up on holographic displays which hung in the air. Ludwig sat above it all on a slightly raised platform, his dark eyes glittering. Ludwig pressed a button on the armrest of his chair. A hologram popped up before him, the face of his brother, Larry Koopa.
"Larry,"
Ludwig said. There was a hungry smile on his face, full of anticipation. How could it not be? This was the day when he'd finally show his pathetic father and siblings that he was the true master, the true person destined to sit the Koopa throne. Everyone would fear him, even Luigi, who had beat him several times during his youth, and 7 Stars, who he had slighted despite all the help they had given him in beginning his revolution.
"Are your agents in place?"
Larry smirked, his pale blue eyes glittering. Ludwig knew that look. It was the look his little brother always had when he had plotted something especially devious.
"Oh, they're in place, all right."
Larry chuckled.
"I sure hope Bowser Jr. likes fireworks."
Larry Koopa sat, snug in his Koopa clown car. Around him, the wind whistled around him. Larry had never liked using the small personal aircrafts in the open sky. Small distances were nothing, yes, but he had never understood how his father had flown the entire distance between the Mushroom and Koopa kingdoms in just a single clown car. The wind, of course, was far from the greatest problem Larry was faced with. Only a few miles for him, Larry was faced with what was probably the hugest fleet of airships he had ever seen. They seemed to stretch from each end of the sky and back to the very horizon, each one covered in turrets and bill blasters. Flags flew from their tops, Iggy, Lemmy, Bowser Jr. Even Larry had to admit he was impressed. A fleet this big, commanded by more likely than not the brightest minds from high command, could put an end to the Neo-Empire without a doubt. Sure, they had a chance. Ludwig's new models of airship and his mechs were each worth 3 Koopa battleships, and that wasn't even counting the older fleets that the 4 sectors could amass. Still, regardless of who'd win, it would be a war that would last several years. Should the war drag on, both sides exhausted, and then Bowser himself decide to join the fray, the Neo-Empire would be crushed. The Koopa Central Elite Force had a fleet larger than any single district, commanded by the Grand General himself. Naturally, neither he nor Ludwig wanted to take that risk. Larry pressed a button on his clown car's control panel, closing his communications with Ludwig. The sounds of engines and propellers filled his ears as the massive armada drew closer. He was so inconspicuous they hadn't noticed him yet, but they easily could soon, and if they did he was as good as dead. The risk was part of the fun, of course. Larry opened communications with Koops. His general looked even more melancholy than usual. He was probably aching to join his former companions, who had supposedly been released from Stone Shell prison earlier. That, and an ex-companion of Mario's probably would object to the operation they were running here.
Everything ship-shape, Coops?
Coops sighed.
Yeah, it is,
he said, before looking up at Larry.
Your Highness, is. Nah, there's no other way.
Larry chuckled, leaning back in his seat.
What, did you think I was about to give this all up out of the kindness of my heart, Coopsy? Man, you haven't learned a thing. You're a very tiresome general, you know. Then dismiss me.
Coops shrugged. Larry smiled cruelly.
What, and let you go running to your friends? No, I need the strength of a guy who's fought the Shadow Queen on my side, thank you very much. You're still General Coops, my friend, and all it takes is a snap of my fingers to snuff your family's little lives out.
Coops hung his head.
I understand, Your Highness.
Coops replied.
I got a call from the Shy Bandit just 5 minutes ago. He and the rest of the anti-Guy squads have finished placing the bombs.
Larry nodded.
Enjoy the rest of the day, Coops. Go throw a party or something. When my big bro's the Emperor, he might even make this day a holiday for all we know.
The hologram of Coops disappeared. Larry took a moment to savor Bowser Jr.'s fleet. It was a beautiful sight. Such an assembly of Koopa troop power hadn't ever been seen since his father had called the entire army together to march on Toad Town in what would begin their worldwide conquest. 3 of his brothers were probably flying towards him right now, dreaming of the day they'd drag their traitorous siblings before the throne of Emperor Bowser and get them to plead for forgiveness. It was just a little hilarious. Larry pressed the button. The entire sky lit up orange. Flames flashed over the clouds as burning wood and dented cannons hurtled through the air. A flag bearing Bowser Jr.'s emblem blew past Larry, burning away into ashes. Ship after ship blew into flames, blooming like orange flowers, their figureheads cracking and melting. For everything ship that was still intact, 3 around it were exploding, showing their neighbors with debris. Even though it was midday, the entire sky was tinted a brilliant amber as if sunset.
Man, it's too bad Junior and I were on opposite sides,
Larry remarked, watching the spectral unfold.
With that magic paintbrush of his and a big enough canvas, this would have made one pretty picture.
The sapphire light continued forward on its journey. Ludwig could see more ships flanking it, new airship Mark IIIs mixed in with the old battleships, the Mark II. His fleet in total consisted of 150 ships, large enough to take a city. If he had been going up against his father, of course, he would have taken 5 times the number, but against this foe he really didn't think that necessary. The hologram of Larry flicked on.
Well, bro, we did it.
Larry grinned. Ludwig smiled.
Thank you for the information, Larry.
He closed the hologram and stood up.
Men, commence attack. Yes, Your Highness.
The crew saluted. Ludwig gazed out of the massive window before him. Sarasaland Castle loomed in front of his fleet, its white towers reaching for the sky amidst a sea of red-roofed houses. 30 battleships surrounded it, a flimsy shield compared to his superior forces. Most of Morden's fleet had been destroyed in other battles or had been part of the doomed fleet that had set out to make an end of his glorious Neo-Empire. Morden had always been ill-suited for war. The people of Sarasaland would enjoy being ruled by a Koopa who knew how to handle these sorts of things. The guns on Ludwig's ship began to fire, blue light streaking down towards the city and blasting the houses. Ludwig turned around with a swish of his cape. A battle like this deserved an even better view than up on the bridge. Ludwig took the elevator down, the sounds of explosions echoing outside. Once he felt the ship rock, but only slightly. His state-of-the-art armor could not be easily harmed by a simple bullet bill. Ludwig exited the elevator and strolled down a corridor lit with blue lights, reaching a door at its end. This door was intended for maintenance purposes, but it would serve him just fine. Ludwig opened the door and stepped outside onto the airship. Wind whipped around him, blowing at his blue hair. There was a deafening boom to his left as a turret fired. Up ahead, Ludwig could see that Morden's tiny fleet was also taking heavy fire. Sarasa City was located in the center of Sarasa land between its 4 sub-kingdoms, in a grassy region that its locals had often nicknamed the Daisy Hills. It was surrounded by a stone wall, on which Morden's army had mounted several bill blasters. But his mechs were making short work of that obstacle. Already they were advancing, firing at the walls with their lasers and causing huge chunks of it to collapse to make way for his ground troops. Ludwig walked the length of the sapphire light as lasers and bullet bills whizzed around him, his cape flapping in the wind. He kept his eyes fixed on the palace. The prize that he was about to claim. Ludwig had not built his warships with open-air decks, they were an outdated concept that only put the crew at risk, but even on the unsteady hull of the shape that hadn't been designed to be walked on, Ludwig felt like the king he had always been meant to be. The noises, the smoke, the fact that a stray attack could strike him. None of that mattered. This was his moment. Sector 2 was about to fall, and with the destruction of Bowser Jr.'s armada, it would only be a matter of time before the rest of the Empire would be under his command. Perhaps, before being thrown into the cell he had spent the rest of his life, his father would finally realize that he was the true heir and always had been, not that simpering brat Jr. One of Morden's warships was bearing down upon him, its guns firing wildly. There was a figure standing on the front of the ship. A huge Koopa, his muscular scales an earthy brown, and the top of his skull and his shell a stone grey.
Ludwig!
Morden yelled angrily.
Hello, Morden!
Ludwig said with a cold smile, reaching the front of his ship.
I'm gonna get you for this!
Morden exclaimed, as furious as he had ever seen him. The Koopa drew a huge black hammer, which glowed with magical runes. The sight would be enough to make a lesser man duck into his shell in fear, but Ludwig knew his brother. Morden had a slow mind and a gentle soul, which meant he had never been able to take advantage of his great power. He himself was the opposite. Ludwig closed his eyes and threw his arms open wide.
Come and get me, brother!
He smiled.
I'm yours for the taking!
Morden roared and leapt from his ship, trailing violet light from his hammer. Ludwig opened his eyes and stretched out his arm. Morden was coming towards him like a meteor, his hammer poised to deliver a smash so powerful it would blast a hole right through even a ship as well shielded as the sapphire light. Ludwig stretched out his arm, which glowed with a dark sapphire energy. As if time itself had froze, Morden stopped, his hammer just inches from Ludwig's head. Morden's eyes bugged out in fear.
I was always meant to be king, Morden!
Ludwig said softly, touching his brother's face.
Tell that to our father!
Then he pointed a claw at Morden and there was a blinding blue flash. A bolt of magical energy struck Morden in the chest and launched him downwards, towards the city that no longer was his. Morden, enveloped in blue fire, crashed through the roof of a house. There was blue explosion of light that ate up the houses around where he had fell, sending debris flying through the air as still more houses were struck by the lasers of Ludwig's warships. Ludwig turned his gaze back to the palace, which was glinting in the sunlight. It was as if he had just completed a brand new symphony. One day, there will be songs about this, Ludwig promised himself. Even after I am long dead, people will sing of the rise of Emperor Ludwig the Great, and the glories of his conquest. Chaos reigned within the Sarasaland palace as the Kupa guards dashed to and fro, shouting orders.
The Mad Chain Chomp and Prince Morton's fist have been destroyed. We've got a mech in the East District, and it seems to be unstoppable. Prince Morton's down, no word on if he's dead or alive.
With all excitement, it was easy for the guards to ignore one princess. Daisy stole out of the chamber that had been her prison for longer than she could remember. She felt sad as she crept down the tall, gilded corridor lined with the portraits of her ancestors. This palace was her home. But staying here now would just be giving herself up to Ludwig. She had had more than enough of being a prisoner, thank you very much. Daisy's face was hard and her blue eyes shone as if on fire. She had played princess in a tower long enough. Now it was time to get down to business.